In that gospel passage, the disciples are being tossed around by the storm at sea in this fragile boat. They're at their wits' end. They're exhausted and terrified by the storm. Now, I got to tell you, a storm at sea is possibly the worst event that a fishing craft can experience. And it is on the fourth watch, we're told. That's well into the night. That's somewhere between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. In the darkest hour, and when human strength has been exhausted, Jesus comes walking on the water to those frazzled disciples. Who can walk on water? Well, shouldn't that be a sign to them of Jesus' identity and his power? Certainly, he's going to be able to rescue them, but his appearance only adds to their fear. Their teacher can now walk on water in the middle of this disastrous storm and not drown. And besides the fear of the storm, a new fear arises, a fear of one who they know, who now appears to be a ghost, and he's coming towards them. So let's just stop the story right there. It doesn't take a whole lot of imagination these days to identify with those terrified apostles as we face deadly storms and floods in our country, the worst in our history. Or clearly, within our short-term memory, we can easily recall the deadly wave of the pandemic with its indiscriminate power to kill as it swept across the world like some horrible storm. Or even as recent as today, on the Hawaiian island of Maui, a brutal storm of wildfire and death that increases daily. Do we feel like the disciples, victims in those tragic clutches? And like them, do we look in the midst of this raging storm and wonder if maybe Jesus is just a ghost, a product of our fear-driven imagination? It is one thing to have faith and come to worship regularly when life is just moving along with its usual ups and downs. But when a storm is so violent, mindless, life-threatening, well, that calls for another level of faith. And let's call this nevertheless faith. In the face of overwhelming and frightening forces, we don't close our eyes or just hope that it'll go away someday. We acknowledge the reality of its threat and its test on our faith. And even though the forces lined up against us seem insurmountable, we profess, nevertheless, I believe that the Lord is with me. So this gospel story, it reaffirms my faith. I don't believe that Jesus is sitting above the turmoil that we experience, and he's looking down from heaven and sheds a tear of sympathy at our terrifying struggles. No. Jesus stands with us. He comes to us. He is with the emergency responders. He's with the police and the firefighters and doctors and nurses, hospital staff, EMTs, all those who are daily protecting and rescuing us. It is that, nevertheless, faith that tells me that Jesus joins with me and reassures me. Some biblical stories stir up memories of specific times and places for me. And today's gospel is one of those. Has any of you ever experienced a storm at sea on a craft? Sure you have. You had a family tragedy? That's a storm at sea. A personal financial disaster? That's a storm at sea. 9/11, that was a really big storm at sea. The indiscriminate deaths of over 1 million people in the United States due to the COVID pandemic, that's a storm at sea. And most recently, the massive floods in the north and the oppressive heat in the south, these are all storms at sea. You don't have to be a biblical scholar to get the story of the disciples in the storm. We get it because it speaks to the hard reality of our own lives. We have hope, and we look forward to when the storms are over. And we pray that our faith in Jesus' presence with us will stay firm. And even when that storm passes, life has taught us that there'll be more. And if we are personally at this Eucharist today, or like some of us watching Mass on TV, we ask for a strong faith to keep our eyes focused on Jesus, and for the faith to enable us to walk on these troubled waters. We also ask Him to calm the storms of fear and doubt and desperation within us. And then, despite the turmoils, when we have experienced that strong, nevertheless faith, we can say in one voice, right with the disciples, truly, you are the Son of God.